The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. In the Senate today, the Attorney-General said about the WA kickback scandal, and I quote, "There was never any agreement or understanding." So why on Friday did the West Australian newspaper report, and I quote, "Senator Brandis told Mr Gleeson an understanding had been reached between the federal and WA governments"? And why is the Treasurer of Western Australia insisting that there was an understanding and agreement between the West Australia and federal government? Who is telling the
Leader
truth?
of the Opposition's time has expired. The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, based on his track record, there is absolutely no prospect that the Leader of the Opposition is telling the truth. He has no regard for it. It is, as I said, a simple coincidence. Whether one of his statements is true, sometimes it may be. It may get the date right, or the day of the week right. But in any matter that relates to his self-interest, his political self-interest, he will prefer to say what suits him rather than what is factual. Now, the reality is this, Mr Speaker. The Attorney-General has dealt with all of these matters in a very lengthy statement in the Senate, and he has tabled the correspondence, which is not as represented by the Leader of the Opposition. But the Attorney-General's statement speaks for itself. It's comprehensive, it deals with the issues, and the Leader of the Opposition should stop misleading the House, and he should focus on the factual matters set out by the Attorney.
The member for Barton. The member for Isaacs has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Did the Attorney-General verbally instruct the Solicitor-General not to run a particular argument in the Bell case in the High Court? And, Prime Minister, this is not covered by the Attorney-General's statement in the Senate today, and the Attorney-General has said on Sky News today, and I quote, "I'm not going into that matter."
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, during the motion that was raised earlier today denouncing the Attorney-General over this matter, which was being moved, of course, before he had even completed his statement to the Senate on it, showing the Shadow Attorney-General's high regard for due process and natural justice. I was turning to talk to my colleagues, and I heard the words, "The Attorney-General is a disgrace." Mr Speaker, I didn't need to turn around to see who'd said that. It's always the member for Isaacs. I mean, Mr Speaker, not since Rumpole spilt claret on Humphrey Featherstone QC MP's Jabbo has there been such a shameful enmity in the bar common room. It is relentless. You can set your clock on it. A denunciation of the Attorney-General. Mr Speaker, the fact of the matter is the Attorney-General has set out a comprehensive statement of events. The Shadow Attorney-General is asking me what transpired in a conversation between two distinguished members of the bar at which I was not present. Obviously, I don't know what transpired between them, but the Attorney-General has set out his account of the events. It's completely comprehensive, and I refer honourable members to it. And I really hope that in this spirit of Christmas and goodwill, the member for Isaacs will find something good about the Attorney-General and perhaps may think kindly of his fellow QC. Surely there must be something that can bring them together at this happy time of year.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's earlier answer where he claimed the relevant correspondence had been tabled. In the Senate today, the Attorney-General said of the Minister for Social Services, "He told me that on 2 March 2016 his office had received an email from the WA State Solicitor containing a summary briefing and slideshow of the history of the matter. Why were these materials not tabled in the Senate today? And will the Prime Minister undertake to table these documents in the Parliament today?"
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the documents that were appended, I should say, to the Attorney General's statements, the correspondence between the WA government and the Treasurer, and that was the correspondence I'm referring to. You've asked me about some other correspondence that was sent to the government. I'll certainly inquire about that correspondence and report back to the House as to whether it can be tabled. It may be that it has important issues of confidentiality as between the WA government and the Commonwealth government. But can I just make? I just want to make.
The member for
put this
Grayndler.
in context, Mr. Speaker. The Bell Group litigation, as I think honourable members know, has been going on for over 20 years. It is a modern version of the Jarndyce and Jarndyce litigation, immortalised in Dickens' novel Bleak House, where the lawyers are basically chewing up the assets of the estate. And what the Western Australian government sought to do was to deal with that. The legislation that they passed had a fatal flaw in it, which was, well, perhaps may have had others, but a fatal flaw in it, which was that it was inconsistent with provisions of the Federal Taxation Act, a point which was raised by a number of parties in the litigation, including the Australian Taxation Office, and which was the basis for it being struck down. Now, I'm prepared to accept that the West Australian government's desire to bring the litigation to a close and ensure that the assets were fairly distributed was a reasonable one, but it was, from their point of view, flawed from a constitutional point of view. The Australian Taxation Office was represented, the Commonwealth was represented, the Section 109 argument was put, I understand, by a number of other parties, and if you read the High Court's judgment, their decision on that was very emphatic. So that's the fact of the matter.
Gordon.
But the Commonwealth's interest was thoroughly protected. But the consequence of that, I'm afraid to say, is that this litigation appears to be continuing without end, and no doubt it is much to the benefit of the legal professionals involved, and as it continues to diminish the proceeds of the liquidator, the proceeds of the estate.